that was the only criteria for this list.
Yeah,
they didn't have anything else. It wasn't short term, long term. It was nothing. It was just who are the best top 6 players coming in.
I think it's wild to have Grant Bricks on.
Well, but to be fair,
that just depends on how those 22 whatever it was
they interpreted it.
And the thing is, you could almost cut this list in half and be like, I'm going to take 3 guys that I think are going to be impacts for 2024 and 3 guys that are going to be impacts for long term.
45, 50, 45, 40, 35, 30. He's going to go. Holy cow.
Big Red Junkies.
Day by day, he gets better and better. He gets better and better. Keep it JPB. Oh, man, woman, and child, he just turned this stadium inside out.
Fuck yeah. Welcome 4th of July week.
Welcome to Freedom Week.
Freedom Week, baby.
Fuck yeah.
Oh, it's good to be on here. It's good to be back. We took a couple weeks off, and we're talking about all kinds of things that have changed that are a little bit different.
Before we get too far into this, I have to shout out 2 people. Good job on the cracking the beer.
There you go.
I have to shout
Freedom
out,
Week. Come on.
Yes, I have to shout out 2 people. One is my soon-to-be 10-year-old nephew, Drew Callahan.
What up, Drew?
He is like a very loyal listener and watcher of our show. He's every time I see him, he's like, "When's the next episode coming out?" And I will say, maybe Thursday or whatever else. Well, what time? Like, dude, relax. It'll come out.
No, don't relax. Don't listen to him. Say, just get the show out, Uncle Jed.
As every single show is marked explicit, I apologize to your mom for all the fucking swearing.
Yeah. We're really fucking sorry.
But Drew, thank you for listening, and I have to tell you, the Mets suck. So go ahead.
And they do.
The second guy I have to shout out is back in the beginning of May, because I took some time off from the shows, and randomly this guy walks in, and he walks by me and goes, "Holy shit, you're Jed from Big Red Junkies."
It's always fun to get recognized.
Thank you. That's great. And so his name was Bob. He and I had a great conversation with my buddy Mike. He's a big stats nerd like I am, and he enjoys the show very much. So Bob, thank you very much. I know this is very late in me calling you out, but thank you for listening.
Bob, as these shows are marked explicit, you can also apologize to you.
We're so fucking sorry. We're getting a little squirrely tonight. It is 4th of July week. Today is July 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
And how
2 days away from freedom.
Jesus. I was about to say, how things have changed. We're referencing an article from back in February 8th about the Super 6 24/7 Sports put out. Basically just talking about the newcomers coming in, the transfers and the recruiting class. Obviously, including Don Riola, including a bunch of the guys that we are all very high on going into this year.
Yeah, so this list is only in regards to new players coming in, regardless of if they're from high school or from other teams in
transfer,
college.
Yes,
got it.
And so what they do is after the February recruiting date, they ask a handful of Nebraska reporters to list off their Super 6 plus a sleeper of all of the newcomers that are coming in. They ended up asking, I think it was 22 people on this one. And we're talking about the consensus of what they had back in February and how much maybe that list would have changed after we know what we know now from spring ball and everything else.
But if you think about it, we did a show, super similar time frame to this, about the newcomers. We did it more focused on, who's the most important freshman, who's the most important transfers, kind of separated.
Yeah.
I think we did a top 5. And our lists are probably just as different as these are.
Oh, if we did that show again now, my list would be drastically different.
Yeah. Yeah. What's wild, one of them that I think of that's not on this list right off the top, and that probably wouldn't have been on our list previous to spring, is Bly Hill. And if the injury didn't happen in the spring game, we're talking about him being probably top 3 on this list, especially now thinking about where we are, trying to fill that hole across from Tommy Hill.
Yep.
So it's interesting. The consensus top 6 that they had out here It's no surprise to have Dylan Riola at the top. I think you said all the riders except for one.
Every single one of them. No, every single one of them.
20 of 22 had him at number 1.
But everybody had him on the list.
Well, of course. If
you don't have him on the list, you're just being dumb.
Yeah. There's over 30 players here, so
yeah,
he's on every single list.
There was one person that had him at number 2. I think it was Carter Nelson that was number 1 on that list. Mitch Sherman had him all the way at number 4. He had Jamal Banks, Micah Mazuka, and Stephen Thompson above Dylan Riola. So those were the only 2 that had Dylan Riola not number 1.
You know, it's interesting when people are talking about Stephon Thompson right now. You're hearing his name kind of rumble out there just a little bit because he's a guy that, again, a transfer in, don't really know where he sits with the coaches after some negativity that was shared about him early in spring. Never really heard much about him late in spring, but he's a guy that we're going to have to rely on in that linebacker room.
Yes.
And so it makes sense that he would be on this list, but to see that the consensus ran Dylan Riola, Carter Nelson, Grant Bricks at number 3, thinking about that we have 17, 18, 19 offensive linemen in that room right now, how the hell do you think a freshman is going to be on this list? We'll get there in a second.
Yep.
Number 4 was Caleb Benning. Number 5 is Dante Dowdell, and 6 is Micah Bazooka. A couple of these guys, when we first started talking about this yesterday or the day before, about doing this show, I was like, first of all, how do we define Super 6 for this season, you know, for this class? I feel like if you're talking about newcomers, that's only referencing the new people, so the first year. So this really needs to be how they're affecting this season. And especially since we're right in the middle of kicking off our countdown that's coming out literally tomorrow, on the 4th of July, starting down the 50 days, counting down the most important people on the Nebraska football team, whether they be coaches or players, to the 50 days leading up to this. Is kind of looking at that top 6.
Yep.
And I know all 3 of our top 6s were very different in that, but this is just the players. This is just newcomers.
Well, you talk about criteria. That was the only criteria for this list.
Yeah.
They didn't have anything else. It wasn't short-term, long-term. It was nothing. It was just who are the best top 6 players coming in.
I think it's wild to have Grant Bricks on.
Well, but to be fair,
that just depends on how those 22, whatever it was,
they interpreted it.
And the thing is, you could almost cut this list in half and be like, I'm going to take 3 guys that I think are going to be impacts for 2024 and 3 guys that are going to be impacts for long-term. You know, so
or some of them aren't
2 separate lists. I want to see a list for right now, and I want to see a list for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think the only way you don't see Banks wind up on here is because he only has 1 season.
Yes.
So it really is all, you know.
Well, isn't that the same case for Micah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He only has 1 season too. So.
Yeah. And he ended up at number 6 on the list.
Yeah.
Well, and again, like, you know, looking at who ended up being the consensus top 6, Dante Dowdell in February was the guy that everybody talked about at running back.
Yep.
And as we saw, as spring continued and into the spring game, after the spring game and everything else, Dante Dowdell didn't really get talked about. I'm not saying he's not going to play, but it's kind of interesting that he's on the Super 6 list now. I don't know how many Super 6 lists he'd be on if you did it right now.
Instead of February?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the running back room to me is just one that it's so hard to try and add or subtract people on lists like this.
Well, I'm not saying that you would put a running back. I'm saying I think that there are other players that you would put over Dowdell.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
But see, I don't know that I would. Because what I saw in the spring game is different than what a lot of people saw in the spring game. And I think he's going to be more of a bell cow for us than what a lot of people are expecting, especially if we have any sort of injury problems with anybody else that we think we might have injury problems with, that we have injury history
really
with.
Depends on how much we have to run the football.
That too. We're still going to run the football.
Yeah, we're going to have to run the football.
If you don't think we're going to run the football, you're crazy.
Yeah, I didn't say we weren't going to run the football. I'm saying have to run the football.
No, I personally, I think that the way that Dylan Riola is going to be able to open up the offense a little bit more is actually going to really positively affect our run game from the running back's position.
That's what I mean by have to. We don't have to run the football in order to move the ball this year.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, it's also not going to be our quarterback running it. So,
yeah.
That being said, I think we can easily cross number 1 off the list for us. I mean, Dylan Riola has to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's laughable to me now that every single person in the world is talking about Dylan Riola as the starter other than our coaching staff. Like, it's a no-brainer. It's a duh moment. I get what the coaching staff is trying to do, and I totally appreciate it, but
Yeah, I don't think it's laughable only from the standpoint of you still want competition in your locker room.
We all know what's happening.
It's part of the game. I mean,
you're not going to not put your starting quarterback at number 1 if he's on the list.
Yeah, that's going to have to be there. I think for me, number 2 and
number 3 are the interesting ones to me.
For me, I think Micah Bazooka is probably number 2 on this list, just because I think his experience in SEC football starting on the offensive line is going to play a huge factor. I think he's probably second, if not third most important, third, if not second most important offensive lineman that we have coming back into this year.
So as part of the consensus top 6, of those 6 guys, I would put Mazuka at number 2, but in my own personal current top 6, I had Mazuka at 3.
Who'd you have at 2?
Jamal Banks. I mean, because we need that stud wide receiver. We need the reliable wide receiver that is going to be able to catch the ball over the middle and just move the chains, basically. It's such a priority.
Yeah.
Outside of the turnovers, which is an obvious statement, just being able to move the ball for having a wide receiver like that, a consistent wide receiver, is so imperative.
Yeah. No, I don't hate that. I don't hate that pick there at all. Do you have those guys up there for you?
If you're talking about this year, absolutely.
Yeah.
Looking at this list, you can
guys,
kind of see that a lot of these pollers, they were thinking more long term, and I think that both Carter Nelson and Grant Bricks are going to be amazing for this team
long term
later down the road.
Yes.
If you're talking about this year specifically, they don't belong on there at all. Neither does Caleb Benning.
All of the guys that I have in my current top 6 are all this year, not long term.
And all the guys, if we're looking at just this year, I only have one freshman on the list, and that's Dylan Riola. Everybody else's transfers coming in.
I have, as far as my top 6, I would have 3. Because I still, with the way Ja'Cory Barney and Vincent Shavers flashed,
Shavers has to be on there.
I had to put them in my top 6.
The way that they talked about Shavers makes me feel like we're going to see him as much as a Prince will, as a Cam Lenhart last year.
Yeah.
We're going to see him out there.
He's a necessity this year, for sure.
Not necessarily, but
that linebacker room is a small room.
If he's making himself undeniable, like we've talked about on our previous shows, he's going to be out there, and he's going to have to be on this list.
So in my own personal current top 6, I actually have 2 linebackers, one at 5, one at 6. One's the freshman, one's the transfer. I think Stephen Thompson, who's my number 6 guy, is a necessity, not just for on-the-field experience, but also in the linebacker room experience with this defense.
Yeah.
And then Vincent Shavers, just because of the way he's flashing everywhere and being brought up, I had to put him also on the list.
Yeah. I feel like putting any of the freshman linemen on there, and it's nothing to hate on you, because I know that when we did that original show back then, I know you had Grant Bricks like number 2 on your, like you were.
Well, I think long term too.
Yes.
Super high thinking about it. And I feel like if we see true freshman offensive linemen on the field at all this year, it's in a blowout. It's in a blowout at the end of the game, because they've got 4 games they can play in without burning a red shirt.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily disagree. That's just the difference between looking at now or looking at the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, I would have to look at a newcomers list as being when they're new, which is this year. You got to have Banks on there. I think you have to have Nair on there. The stuff that we saw in the spring game, the way that
Nair was super close for me.
The way that they're talking about his athleticism and the freak ability that he had going into Texas before he got hurt, I truly think that he could be a true breakout. Like, he could be the number 1 wide receiver for us this year.
I had like 13 guys as far as to try to whittle down my top 6, and Nair would have been number 8, because also on this list that they have on 24/7, they had everybody do a top 6 and then a sleeper. My sleeper is Camden Cook, just because of the punting situation that we have.
Sure, that's a good one.
I put him at 7. But
that's a great sleeper.
But I put Nair at 8 just because I felt like I needed him on the list, but at the same time, he just barely missed.
I'm with you there. I think I have both those wide receivers on there. I have to have Mazuka. I have to have Riola. I have to have Stephon Thompson, I think. And honestly, if I'm really being truly honest about this, and my biggest question mark on the entire team right now, sits in the DB's room. I'm in the camp that I think that new Sayer Wright that's coming in from USC, that is a dude that, like, he will be the top-rated recruit that we have on defense.
Especially with the circumstances right now.
Well, you look at the circumstances, yes. Yeah. But he's a guy, like, if you really take a look at, and I want to get into this because we're actually going to do a second show tonight, and this is more focused on that, but if you really looked at, we talked about the Bly Hill situation and how none of us would have had him on this list February 8th, but looking at April 30th, we would have all had him on that list if he hadn't gotten injured. If we were talking about both those guys coming in at the same time in, like, back early in the winter, we would be way more excited about Sayer Wright than we would be about Bly Hill.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a guy who was a almost a borderline 5-star cornerback going to USC as a true freshman. He's already got, I think, 15 games started at USC. Didn't play last year, ended up leaving the team. It sounded like there was a lot of distraction and things that went into, being in Hollywood, and he was in some movies and he was in some commercials. Like I said, I want to break this down a little bit further in a different show, but he's a guy that I think could be a true impact guy if he comes in and doesn't have that delay. Mitch Sherman actually mentioned this on their Locked On podcast. If he doesn't have that delay that we've seen like a Stephon Thompson have or a Mazuka have when they come in and it's like, shit, I've got to learn how to do it the Nebraska way. I'm not all that in a bag of chips like I thought. If he doesn't have that delay and he hits the ground running and is humble and just works, I think the sky's the limit. And he, you look at Tommy Hill being a guy who transferred in last year and took a minute to get off the ground, even though he was going back and forth and they didn't know exactly where to put him.
Yeah.
He wound up at the end of the year, he's a top 10 Pro Football Focus returning DB in the country.
It didn't matter where they put him. He was going to go find the football.
But that's what I mean. He's not even as highly touted or wasn't even as highly touted of a recruit as what this Sayer Wright is. And so I think I have to put him on this list both because of his potential, his ceiling is high, but at the same time also the situation.
Yeah.
So that rounds out my list.
So you're saying Sayer Wright is as addicted to the football as Tommy Hill is?
He might be.
Fuck, I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tommy Hill was jonesing in every game.
Another guy that I have to bring up only because with our top 50 list that is going to be coming out very soon, when we were talking about who should and shouldn't be on our top 50 list, one of the guys that you brought up a handful of times, BJ, was Mario Buford. And I was I was against that necessarily because I didn't think that he was really going to crack a very deep room, a very inexperienced room. At least it's top heavy. We've talked about that 1,000 times. But Mario Buford showed up on a lot of these lists on this 24/7 of these 22 different reporters. Mario Buford came up on a lot of people's lists. I was kind of surprised by that. I mean, I'm not saying I'm shocked, but I was kind of surprised that he came up as much as he did.
I think that has to do with where he came from, the high school that he came out of. He's playing big boy football, big boy Texas football. He is not coming out, like we talked about with Grant Bricks way back in that show. I remember talking about how there's a difference between him and Gibson Pyle. Grant Bricks is probably the physical freak. Like he has the higher ceiling, but he hasn't been playing the talent that Gibson Pyle's been playing.
Shit, he hasn't even been playing the same number of people on the field.
Well, they were still playing 11 man.
I thought D2 was 8 man.
Not Grant Bricks. Not out in Iowa. He was. You're thinking Carter Nelson was playing 8 man football. But anyway, what I was getting to is that was my main thing, and him already kind of being ingrained with the Nebraska way, having his brother already here. So I felt like he had a little bit of a leg up on a lot of the other dudes that are in that room that truly don't have any experience. So. He'd be fringe. He'd be a sleeper type guy for me. But I think the Cook one is actually a better pick for sleeper because he might be a necessity.
The situation, yes. Yeah. I also want to make sure we're not hating on Caleb Benning. He made the top 6. No. There has been some kind of talk that he might be in the mix for some special teams things as far as returns. But
be undeniable, man.
But specifically, Matt, with what you were talking about with Cardinals and Grant Bricks, long term,
I think you guys just. It's very clear 100%. That most people were looking at this as a long-term list.
Yes.
And I think that Caleb Benning, Grant Bricks, Carter Nelson, they all fit in long-term.
Yeah.
They're all going, especially under Matt Rule, where he builds players up as much as he does. These guys could all be studs coming in 3 years from now.
The versatility of Caleb Betting coming out of Westside, playing the way that he did on both sides of the ball and everything else, like, yes, long term, absolutely no doubt, 100%. He's on my list as far as long term.
That's the only way that this list makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a good list. It's a great link. You guys should go check it out.
Absolutely. Especially it's fun to look at it now because they're doing, we're not criticizing this list in February because it looks like a good list.
Yeah.
But now going through spring, hearing what we heard, seeing what we've seen, all that stuff, it's kind of fun to look at like how many players. I would have almost 4 of those 6 guys not on my list.
Especially since it's not really, outside of Bly Hill, it's not really affected by injury. It's just what we know about the players now, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not affected by injury moving forward.
Yeah.
No weights dropped on foots or anything like that. But check it out, guys. This will be coming out. This came out on July 3rd. Tomorrow we have some fun stuff dropping for you. Be looking for content for us every single day until football starts back up.
Also, happy birthday, America.
Happy fucking birthday.
Fuck yeah.
America. America. And this may be the most unbelievable night in Cornhusker football history.